Hello. Good evening, everyone. Hi, it's good to see you again. Melina, Dean of the College. And I am pleased to welcome you to the 2025 Aims of Education Address. The college has many rituals and traditions that capture our approach to education and our distinctive culture. You've encountered a few of them already, and there will be more as you dive into coursework and into student life. You may even be part of creating new ones in the next few years. The Aims of Education Address stands out as one of our dearest and most important college traditions. For the address, an esteemed faculty member is asked to speak to incoming students with their answer to the seemingly simple question, in your view, what are the aims of education? This is not the presentation of an institutional view, but shows our respect for and interest in the opinions of a distinguished colleague who makes no claim or attempt to represent the community as a whole. As you might expect from your faculty, these opinions are lively and sometimes controversial. You should have an interesting discussion about tonight's remarks in your houses later in the evening. The Aims Address dates back over 60 years to 1962, when College Dean Alan Simpson invited Christian Macauer to give the first address, with the idea that it would orient the minds of students and faculty to the year ahead. Each year since, our incoming students have gathered at the beginning of the year for this purpose. The addresses and the scholars who deliver them tend to play an important role in the memories of alumni, recent and not so recent, who tell us about the challenging themes, ideas, and turns of phrase that have stuck with them. I'm sure tonight's address will linger as well. I've known and admired our speaker for quite a long time. She is Peggy Mason, professor in the Department of Neurobiology and in the college, and faculty director of Science Communication and Public Discourse. Peggy has a special talent for unsettling what we think we know. When I was applying to my faculty position here in 2001, then as a wide-eyed postdoc, anxious for a job, she was one of my interviewers. Peggy asked great questions, some really tough ones, a number of which I did not have answers for, and had me on my heels. I came out of that interview feeling less confident in a good way than before, and much more aware of my blind spots, and with new important questions to consider in my research. Peggy's questions pushed me to learn more and think harder. I've come to understand since that Peggy is not only a top-notch thinker and scientist, but also the most generous colleague at the university. We've now been faculty colleagues and friends for over 20 years, and I am so proud of and grateful for Peggy and her work. Since joining the faculty in 1992, Peggy has expanded our knowledge of how the brain does what it does. Her research lab has explored the neurobiology of empathy, co-leading a now famous experiment that generated evidence of empathy in rats. This has opened fascinating questions about the basis of prosocial behavior that Peggy is investigating now. Peggy's reach in the discipline goes way beyond her impressive list of publications and research activity. She is also a self-proclaimed neuroevangelist who has engaged the public so effectively with discoveries in neuroscience through blogs, podcasts, social media, a widely used textbook for medical students, and an open online course called Understanding the Brain, the Neurobiology of Everyday Life. For all of these accomplishments, Peggy is an energetic advocate for students here in the college. There is no better person to have on your side. And we can thank her for guiding our neuroscience major to the catalog in 2016, and more recently, our minor in science communication and public discourse. Peggy is an inspiring teacher and mentor who received the highest faculty awards that the university confers for both college and graduate teaching: the Quantrell Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching and the university's Faculty Award for Excellence in PhD Teaching and Mentoring. A nominating letter for the Quantrell Award praised Peggy's tireless dedication to creating a lively intellectual environment in her classroom, her devotion to students, and her endless drive to create, innovate, and unlock otherwise inaccessible opportunities for students. Peggy Mason's dedication to learning, growth, and opportunities for students captured the highest aspirations of the college. That is why I am thrilled to introduce her as our speaker for the 2025 Aims of Education address. Thank you.
I'm so glad I didn't trip on the way up here. Thank you to Dean Melina Hale for this opportunity to talk to you, the class of 29, and to transfer students joining the classes of 27 and 28. Welcome to the University of Chicago College. I also thank my colleagues and everyone joining us online for this chance to share my ideas. I do not take lightly your decision to spend with us a sizable chunk of your most valuable resource, the one life you have. Welcome to the I further recognize the magnitude of your entrusting us to be the ones to foster a journey of intellectual growth, change, and curiosity that you can enjoy over a lifetime. You all excel at the type of knowledge acquisition that leads to degrees and professional employment, and in fact, to admission at the University of Chicago. We can provide this type of instruction for you, of course, but realistically, so can many other colleges. Truth be told, you could Google video your way to that type of learning in many subjects. Knowledge acquisition is explicit learning. It is a type of learning that you are fully aware is going on. Memorizing a poem to recite in class, learning vocabulary in a new language, or how to calculate a differential equation, articulating the philosophy of Audre Lorde. These are all examples of explicit learning, learning that is intertwined with language. I suspect that this is what many envisage the college years are all about. And it is true that your college experience will involve learning knowledge and methods of inquiry and developing skills at articulating what you have learned. But alongside mastering the ideal gas law, neuroanatomy, and the role of Manet in launching modern art, I hope for something very different for you. I want you to learn to be uncomfortable, to take intellectual risks, grow as a thinker, accept and ultimately revel in the severe discomfort that accompanies exposure to and potentially adoption of a perspective that clashes brutally with long-held beliefs. Persevere on a thought path even if distress storms in. Learning to carry on through discomfort is not achieved consciously. It is an example of implicit rather than explicit learning. Because it lacks a direct connection to language, implicit learning is ineffable, impossible to perfectly articulate, describe, or explain. It is explicit learning's counterpart. You can assign Wednesday night to buckle down and learn the structure of the periodic table. That will work. However, scheduling Thursday night at the reg to learn to tolerate intellectual discomfort, that won't work. So how do we learn a habit of mind such as developing comfort with discomfort? To understand how, let's look at the superstar of the implicit learning family, and that is motor learning. To illustrate how implicit motor learning differs from explicit learning, we will compare two approaches to teaching children to control their bladders. What is called toilet training in the United States. In one approach, babies learn to control urination by 6 months of age at a time when they neither speak nor understand language. In a second approach, widespread in Western culture, toilet training involves conversations between parents and their toddlers. As we will return to, parents are under the impression that it is these discussions that actually lead to the child's being toilet trained. Just a touch of background. All mammalian babies, human or otherwise, store urine and empty their bladder just fine. In fact, they start doing so in utero. No surprise then that the task is not learned, but rather is accomplished entirely by reflex. This tells us that toilet training is not about teaching children to void per se. Rather, it is the process of transforming urination from an automatic reflex to a volitionally initiated one. We'll start with toilet training in today's North American and European cultures. This is a process that starts when a child is anywhere from 1.5 to 3 years old. The Mayo Clinic advises the following. Start teaching your children simple words like pee and potty. Say these words often. You can tell your child that every person pees. You can also explain that pee is like garbage that the body makes, but do not use words such as dirty or yucky. The Mayo Clinic continues by advising that upon seeing signs that a toddler needs to go to the bathroom, the parent says, "It's time to pee." At 21 months, the parent is advised to explain toilets so that the child knows that the toilet and the potty chair are used for passing urine. There's far more, but I will not belabor this point. Once the child is deemed ready, Mayo advises putting the child on the toilet whenever the child shows signs of needing to pass urine. An example might be that squirm dance that toddlers do, or in any case, every 2 hours or so. Now let's talk about the other approach where babies are dry, meaning in control of their bladders, by 6 months of age. Such early toilet training is the custom in much of Asia and Africa today, and in fact was the rule in the United States until as recently as the late 1930s. How is early toilet training achieved? Essentially the same way that Western toilet training finally comes about, through practice. Early toilet training simply cuts out the preamble of conversing about pee and potties and cuts to the chase. As an example, almost immediately after a baby's birth, a mother of the Digo tribe of Kenya starts training her baby. Upon seeing signs her baby needs to urinate, the Digo mother places the baby between her thighs and makes a shush sound. When the baby urinates, which he almost invariably does, the mother cleans, feeds, and cuddles the baby. The mom repeats this process day in, day out, thereby conditioning the baby to initiate urination only when in place. With nary a word, no potty, no pee, and certainly no blah, blah, blah about the body's garbage or how toilets work, the baby is toilet trained, meaning that the baby controls when he initiates urinating. All this happens before the baby utters a single word or takes one halting step. Is it really true that Western children, the recipients of much teaching, are learning from that explicit verbal instruction? This is highly unlikely. For starters, we do not have any more control over contraction of the bladder, a smooth involuntary muscle, than we do over sweat glands or our left ventricle. That is to say, no voluntary control whatsoever. Now think about it. The conditioning, anticipating when the child needs to urinate and putting the child in place to do so, ends up being the same in early and late toilet training. The big difference is that in early toilet training, conditioning takes place when the child is pre-verbal. Whereas with late Western toilet training, the child has begun to learn language. In some, the narrative of a child being toilet trained through conversation is a case of pasting a veneer of verbal instruction on top of implicit motor learning. Initiating urination is neither the first nor the only action babies acquire using implicit motor learning. Instead, it is the rule for how we figure out how to make the movements we make. When I watch a baby, I imagine an internal dialogue along the lines of, oh, look, there goes my leg. Wow, my hand is opening and closing and opening and closing. This makes my arms move. Movement follows internal thought by an imperceptible moment in time, again and again. Different thoughts produce different movements. Through repetition, babies learn to associate the internal brain experience that produces a movement with the specific movement that was produced. Thought A1 flexes my left thumb. Thought A2 flexes my left pointing finger, and so on. In this way, babies wire up their motor system. They learn which brain button to press for which movement. Learning and making movements implicitly is the rule. Consider a completely intentional action, steering a car through a lane change. As David Eagleman explains in Incognito, when asked to describe how to move one lane to the right, people say they would bank the steering wheel to the right for a moment and then straighten it out. This would in fact steer you off the road and in circles. Eagleman provides the correct answer. Bank to the right, then return past center to bank just as far to the left, and only then do you straighten out. Beyond being a plug for Newtonian mechanics, this example shows us how even a completely volitional, completely conscious act, I want to change lanes, gets accomplished using subconscious motor pathways that are not verbally accessible. The lesson is clear. We can and do learn and act implicitly. To learn the hookups between brain and muscles, a baby babbles with her legs and arms and eyes. She is experimenting, trying stuff, observing the consequences, associating the push of a brain button with a motor effect. Ultimately, the brain acts as an orchestral conductor who directs muscle instruments to produce coordinated movement music. But before it can perform this function, the baby brain needs to learn how its own brain buttons hook up to muscles. This learning step, all implicit of course, is the reason that you have never seen a coordinated baby. The brain does not know how to call on the right instruments at the right moments out of the box. It must learn this, and it makes no assumptions. Does not assume 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 feet. A baby exposed to thalidomide in utero may not have the typical complements of limbs and digits. The configuration of limbs for conjoined twins varies widely. The size and strength of the muscles in your 2, 20, and 60-year-old selves differ substantially. The strength available in your muscles changes from morning to night. How you walk changes as you move from the sidewalk to the sand. The brain metaphorically eats up all the errors produced by changing conditions as though they were manna from heaven. It uses them to modify its conductor routine to match the needs of the ever-changing body in its ever-changing environment. The brain coordinates movements regardless of the number, length, or weight of the limbs. The brain simply waits for you to make errors so that it can correct them, finally bringing your actual movement in line with that smooth, graceful movement that you intended to make. But it can only do this if it gets enough mistakes to work with. No errors means no learning. Playing it safe is simply not going to work. There is a lesson in this bit of neurobiology, one in fact that you already know implicitly. Dance the jitterbug, play the saxophone, pull off a yoga pose, type on a French keyboard, unlock your dorm room. Does anyone perform these actions perfectly on the first time? Absolutely not. No more than a baby can skip toddling to take her first steps at a gallop, or bypass mama to say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious as her first word. The brain cannot work on nothing. A person must toss their hat in the ring, give it a go, even with the full knowledge that there is no way to succeed on that first try. Getting to competence for any action takes errors. Errors accompany the stumbling and bumbling of trying. That is inevitable. Just as walking, piano playing, and the pronunciation of foreign words don't happen on the first go, neither does intellectual risk-taking. Getting to be comfortable with discomfort, discordant and incongruent thoughts, this just does not happen without trying and failing repeatedly. Nico, a class of 2024 UChicago graduate, felt that he had become complacent in his lack of development in the humanities. In reaction, he deliberately enrolled in an elective far outside his science major. He had hopes of finding another voice, another side of myself. Very UChicago. It worked. Quote, I had to be vulnerable, making many mistakes in the beginning, half-baked ideas, quick responses. I had to learn how to articulate my ideas in a more effective manner. I tried and I tried. Trying paid off. Where before I had barely found time to do the readings, now I was searching for more time in the library, going down rabbit holes with favorite works. The rewards for seeking intellectual challenges are the riches of a full and varied intellectual landscape without fences, without no trespassing zones. Motor learning lasts a long time. You only need to learn to ride a bike once, but motor performance requires practice and updating as you become stronger or weaker, more or less agile, and so on. Ideas often need updating too, sometimes tweaks and sometimes overhauls. In The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn discusses paradigm shifts when new interpretations emerge that approximate truth better than the older interpretations did. Kuhn wrote that novelty emerges only with difficulty, manifested by resistance against a background provided by expectation. In other words, established thoughts serve to resist changes, even changes that bring us to a better understanding of the world. Overcoming expectations, your own, that of your parents or friends, is your problem to face down. Why? Because you owe it to yourselves. Let's use a motor analogy again. I want you to imagine whatever sport or video game you enjoy playing. Do you play as you always have and resist trying out a new idea? Imagine saying to yourself, my forehand is good. I think I'll stick with that. I don't need to bother learning a backhand. Well, there's no way. Instead, off you go to learn the backhand, whiffing at first perhaps, but ultimately improving and eventually achieving some competency. Same approach with intellectual skills. Do not tolerate no-fly zones in your thoughts, even when they are painfully uncomfortable. I know this is difficult. I will give you a personal example that unhinged me for a spell. I got interested in the history of Down syndrome. This led me to Jerome Lejeune's discovery that Down syndrome is associated with 3 copies of chromosome 21. I started to read about Lejeune himself, who, like Langdon Down, for whom Down syndrome is named, and others who work with Down children, sang the praises of these children. Lejeune devoted much energy to campaign against the termination of Down syndrome pregnancies. As I was reading a biography of Lejeune, I read a sentence, the upshot of which was that the only difference between a 6-month fetus and a baby born at the same age is their last known address. I reeled. Immediately I saw the implication that if killing one is acceptable, then so is killing the other. That either abortion and infanticide are both okay, or that neither is okay. Instantly enraged, as this idea clashed with principles I was raised with and had never questioned, I e-slammed the article shut and dumped it in the trash. I seethed. I lost sleep. Still, I could not stop thinking about this location idea. As much as I did not welcome this novel perspective on abortion and infanticide, I could not but acknowledge the logic. Not admitting this would have been dishonest, but it was not just that. Coming to accept the reasonableness of the thesis that had so enraged me was not an adoption of Lejeune's perspective. I did not trade in one certainty for another. Rather, I traded in certainty for a more challenging and more interesting terrain filled with examination, questions, and skepticism. Not only did this texturize my own intellectual landscape, it also allowed me to admit additional ways of viewing the topic and discussing it with others. Sitting in a bubble of opinion serves no one, least of all yourself. The dangers of walling ourselves off from ideas was beautifully articulated by the great English philosopher John Stuart Mill. Quote, "The peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity as well as the existing generation. Those who dissent from the opinion still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, we are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, we lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error." What Mill is saying is something that happens all the time in laboratories where procedures can be long, involving many steps. Not every step has been independently tested, which makes the entire sequence part science and part custom. A newbie comes in. Why do we do A and then B? Can't you just skip to B and cut out A altogether? One answer is, actually, we need to do A just in case such and such happens, which would preclude step B. The other answer is, that's a great point. I wonder if it would work. Let's give it a shot. The question invariably produces a win. Either the newbie learns something or the laboratory veterans realize that they've been looking at the problem through such habituated eyes that they have become blinded to what is in front of them. Attack all ideas with skepticism. Question the evidence. Consider the interpretation. Be intellectually playful, even when answers appear patently obvious. In memory of W.B. Yeats, W.H. Auden wrote, "He disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. Oh, all the instruments agree the day of his death was a dark, cold day." In this Auden verse, I see a guiding principle of a rich intellectual life. In order to discern something as simple as the timber of a day, approach with skepticism by seeking confirmation from all available sources and perspectives. One instrument is not enough, nor is two. Use a thermometer, the crowds at the airport, the time of year, the presence of snow, to test if the day of Yeats's death was indeed dark and cold. Use all of your intellectual instruments to evaluate the evidence and arguments to come to your reasoned conclusion. This leads me to my final point, which is enjoy the ride. Here is how class of 2025 graduate Amelia put it. While the easy, sudden light bulb imagery might be prevalent in pop culture, the reality of intellectual shifts is that they are as uncomfortable as they are rewarding. I learned to sink into the nuance, to sink into the gray area, to ask questions for the purpose of exploration rather than clarity. To pick up on Amelia's point, the pleasure of being right and gaining clarity is fleeting. I was right. Yay. 2 + 2 is 4. Yahoo. Case closed. Pleasure's short duration is not terribly surprising, as evolution favors craving and striving over stagnating, couch potato making happiness. Watch winners and losers of championships. The champions are ecstatic for a moment. The smiles and happy tears pass quickly. The runners-up, on the other hand, burn with a fire evident in their faces and in their demeanors that can last for weeks or months or even years. This fire fuels redoubled efforts to gain a championship in the next contest, the next season. As neuroscientist Kent Berridge writes, wanting or craving depends on a large and distributed brain system, whereas pleasure itself is generated just by a few small spots in the brain. Metaphorically, you get to wanting almost every time you turn a corner in the brain, but pleasure hotspots are down hard to find alleyways. Even when a hotspot is reached, happiness is only briefly felt. Enormous evolutionary advantages accrue from wanting and craving, not so much from existing in a satisfied state of bliss. Be wrong, be unsure, and celebrate those feelings. Learn to not just avoid discomfort, but to run to it. No one toilet trains in a day. Intellectual expansiveness is not the product of one course, 1 year, 1 college degree, and not even 1 lifetime. During the next 4 years, use us, the faculty, use the bountiful resources of UChicago, your fellow students, and most importantly, your precious time to condition yourself to being flustered, exhilarated, agitated, exultant, upset, and triumphant as you embark on your own most uncomfortable and simultaneously most rewarding life of intellectual quest. To paraphrase Joseph Campbell, reach for a bolder, cleaner, more spacious, and fuller intellectual life. Grow as a thinker, take risks, change your opinion, even when that change brings you severe discomfort. Learning the habits of thought that will fuel a lifelong affair with thinking and exploring, doubting and growing, changing and modifying your views is worthy of 4 years of your time. Thank you.